the place where I live in is more direct communication. But in other, for example, European countries, since I'm very, very known with Europe, so they use a more indirect communication. So we have to adapt ourselves to the place where we are.
Remind the viewers where you are located. Where do you live?
Norway.
So Norway is known for direct communication.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because people are a little bit close, we can say, and when they talk, so they talk directly.
Okay.
But for example, I were also living in France, and in France we use a lot of words or gestures that is indirectly, but I understand them because I'm used to it.
Hi, this is Sanjay Sharma, and you are tuned to our very special conversation program called Sir, Let Me Tell You, where we invite students who are about to graduate or have recently graduated to impart and reflect on what they have learned and how they plan to apply in their lives, both personal as well as professional. This initiative stems from a startling realization. During a recent discussion with the students, I was pleasantly surprised to notice that they accumulated way more knowledge than I remember sharing during the class discussions. It was a real treat listening to them with their level of sophistication in articulating ideas, concepts, and theories. Frankly speaking, I felt so privileged witnessing their transformation as their teacher, mentor, or coach, and I could not help but recall the Hindi verse. हर सुमन का सुरभि से यह अनलिखा अनुबंध पवन को सौंपे बिना यदि मैं झरूं सौगंध, meaning there is this unwritten contract between the flower and fragrance that the flower would not perish until it facilitates a smooth assimilation of fragrance with the wind so that it could achieve its purpose of existence or what it was meant to. For a teacher, nothing could be more delightful and rewarding than seeing motivated and diligent students come up with flying colors and excel in their fields of interest. All they need is a mentor who could assist them in figuring out a sense of direction and purpose of learning for their flourishing. This initiative is an effort to offer a platform where they can showcase their caliber and competence with confidence. Having taught in different parts of the world in different departments, I would be inviting students from political philosophy to international relations, Korean studies to Asian business management, legal studies to languages, and so on. If this is what resonates with you and you feel motivated to join us as guest students, let me hear from you.
Once again, very warm welcome to our special series, Meet the Expert, in which we invite some of our students or young professionals, call them. This time joining me is Fedwa Mokhtari. She's attending my class of MBA program, and the course is Multinational Management at UBIS Geneva campus, Switzerland. So let's see what she is sharing with us today. Welcome, Fedwa.
Thank you.
What is that you have chosen to talk about today?
Yeah, today we will talk about international negotiating and also about cross-cultural communication. Try to understand how we can negotiate with different culture and the things we can meet in negotiating on the international level.
Well, I think it's the subject has never been irrelevant in the history of international relations or international business. Even after the Chat GPT that we are living in, the age, it is all the more important. So yeah, I think it's going to be really useful, very important, and very timely subject. So help us understand first of all what exactly is this international communication or cross-cultural negotiation? How do we define it?
Of course. International negotiation is the process of making businesses deals across culture, and it precedes any multinational project. So, without negotiating and with a cross-cultural communication, a business can't be successful. And as we can see, the world becomes increasingly global. So, companies will need to become and adapt a search negotiation. On the other side, a culture is also a broad concept of describing the basic things in human mentality and behavior, such as languages, tradition, ideologies, approaches, and etc. Culture is a central element in social life and human actions. So we can also define it as a set of meanings, values, and belief for. Of a collective nature with certain durability, which characterize a group of individuals on a national, ethic, or other basis in the guides of their conduct. And now we have cross-cultural negotiation. That means people are negotiating with people from different cultures. So we have intercultural negotiation that involves discussion of common conflict interests between persons of different cultures background who work to reach an agreement of mutual benefit. Cross-cultural negotiation skills can also help to avoid major misunderstanding and problems with the foreign interlocutors. And mistakes can also damage the business's negotiation, but thus cultural variables must be integrated into a negotiation process. So, therefore, a successful international negotiation requires successful cross-cultural communication.
Wow. um, Suddenly, what I think is there's just a lot of culture involved in that, and given that the multiplicity of cultures in our world, it's not just that the countries differ in terms of culture, but also within the country there is enough cultures, subcultures. So it's something not very easy to surmount, to overcome, right? And we feel very close to our culture, the way we are raised. So this becomes a very central to our personality, who we are. So thinking in terms of negotiations, to what extent these cultural differences affect, or how do they influence actually this international negotiation process? Can you talk about it?
Yes, cultural negotiation affects negotiation first by the process of communication, motivation, and also actions. It influences how actors of negotiation will seek and understand to integrate a culture of like, for example, in particular on the way they are reasoning, analyzing the situation, and also seeking for a solution. So different culture affect how individuals will behave in international negotiation. First, for example, define a negotiation is different from a culture to another. And then we also have cross-culture negotiation will be influenced by extent that negotiation is different and have fundamental agreement or disagreement that depends on the situation, and also how we select the negotiation, because it's different way of the criteria to select negotiation differently, leading varying expectation about what is appreciated in different type of negotiation. And then we have also a very something very important, communication, because the implication of a method of communication of negotiation regard the ability of to transmit information necessary to reach integrative agreement and any dispute resolution preferences, and also the different strategies that is implied, orientation toward a long term or a short term to achieve the goals. So cultural influence have on how people communicate, both verbally or non-verbally, directly and indirectly, through body languages, all that influence a culture. So we have, for example, also something called direct communication, where people communicate directly, ask the question, states opinions, come to the point. And we have also indirect communication, where people attempt to state their opinion or ask by implied meaning. So all that is something that influence the culture and negotiation.
That just makes me think. The place that you're living in, what is the most prevalent way? Is it a verbal communication, non-verbal, or direct or indirect? How is it where you are?
Yeah, the place where I live in is more um, direct communication, but in other, for example, European countries, since I'm very, very known with Europe, so they use a more indirect communication. So we have to adapt ourselves to the place where we are.
Remind the viewers where you are located. Where do you live?
Norway.
So Norway is known for direct communication.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because people are a little bit close, we can say,
Hmm.
and when they talk, so they talk directly.
Okay.
But for example, I were also living in France, and in France we use a lot of words or gestures that is indirectly, but I understand them because I'm used to it.
Okay. So now, when you're in the context of direct and indirect, language must be playing a vital role. Like, even if you compare Norway and France, what role would you, assign to language in these kind of communications?
Yeah, language is the most important thing to that allow people to communicate. First thing, and
Hmm.
language is very essential to culture. And I will, according to Benjamin Lee Worf, anthropologist and linguistic, he argued that the theory that the society's language determine the nature of culture, and so words provide the concept of understanding the world. Language structures the way we think about it, and all languages have limited sets of word. Restricted word sets contains also the ability to conceptualize the world. He argued also that the society's language determines the nature of a culture. Otherwise, other experts disagree with him and mean the opposite. So cultures come first and requires the development of words, so that become languages. Um, and I can say that I also disagree a little bit with him, because I mean that it's the culture who create tradition, languages, and everything, and therefore languages are very critical, because people from different countries use languages to negotiate, and a common language is needed for search of negotiating, and common languages also allow foreign direct investment and international trade to flourish. So therefore. The use of language is the most essential things to try to communicate with each other, and even for companies, it's very critical to have employees that use a common languages to try to trade and yeah, achieve the goals.
Okay. Thinking of languages, I invariably think that there is something called high or low context languages, right? Can
Yes.
you explain what they are?
uh, if we start with low context languages, people state things directly, and they don't need to and like in a conversation you don't need to understand the context, so it's directly spoken. For example, most European, North European countries and use the languages that is directly when they talk. So for example, German, English, and also Scandinavian languages, as for example Norwegian.
Uh-huh.
And we have also high context where people state the things indirectly.
Uh-huh.
And it is an example of some languages. It may be Chinese, Japanese, Italian, Spanish, French, and etc. So their communication may have multi-meaning depending on the context.
Okay, so even within Europe, you have high and low context languages, right? How many languages do you speak? And how
Me?
many of them are, yeah, how many of them are low and high? I just
Yeah.
want to know, can you switch over from one to another? How does it work for you?
The low context languages that I speak is Norwegian, Swedish, and Danish.
Uh-huh.
And also, I'm just new beginner in German, but yeah, German.
Uh-huh.
And high context, French, Arabic, um, English. Yeah, English, I'm not sure if we can place it on low context or high context, because sometimes it's in the middle. It depends
Uh-huh.
on how we talk.
Hmm.
But one more. Yes, that's all. And also Spanish.
Spanish. Wow.
Yeah.
So you are a real multicultural personality, huh?
Yeah.
If you are in this in the world of the realm of international business, probably one of the most successful professional, I would say. Huh? Uh, do
And
you
also
when
to add something, communication between high-low context and high-low context, and it's very it's a challenge because sometimes it may also make it very problematic. For example, I have an example in Japanese. The word
Mhm,
of hi means
mhm,
yes,
mhm,
but it depends on the situation, because it means also yes, I hear you, yes,
mhm,
say it again, yes, give
mhm,
me more information, yes, please
mhm,
continue with the conversation, yes, that
mhm.
I don't know what. And sometimes also when they want to say no, but in an indirectly way, so they say also yes. So for someone non-native, it will be very difficult.
That's true. That's true. Have you faced this kind of difficulty when you're switching from, so you have a group of like 4 or 5 people. One is from France, one is from, Denmark, and does it happen that you make a switch on your, in terms of a personality when you're talking?
Yeah, it's very difficult because sometimes people can see that you use some words, or the way how you're talking, it's different from what they are used to. So
Mhm.
here I think that the challenge is to use a common language that is easy for everyone. But of course, when I'm talking, for example, to a French, then I use an indirectly low context way to talk to that person. And also when I talk, for example, Norwegian or German, then I use also another method. So it's easy to that person to understand. So we have to try to manage this kind of differences and try to understand them and adapt them to different situation and to whose we are talking.
Would you say, just based on your experience, that it requires a lot of mental exercise as well, right? Because your formation, choice of words, or the sentences could also differ, right?
Yes, it's difficult, but for example, if a person is open to many cultures,
Uh-huh.
it's very easy to use them. So it's
Okay.
not to adapt ourselves to another culture. I mean that it's not something difficult.
Uh-huh.
If you try to understand, then it will be very easy to practice.
So it's a matter of like how much acclimatized you are in that culture and the
Yeah.
like. Perfect. So we talked about a language, we talked about this high and low context. Now, what about this communication style? this also must have something to do with the the effectiveness of negotiation or bargaining. How do you explain that?
Yeah. So we have direct communication and indirect communication, as we mentioned, and we have also formal communication that acknowledge rank, titles, and it's more precise language in social interaction. So many other cultures communicate with more formal communication, especially in business, to try to taking care of a knowledge that rank titles when addressing others. And it consists also about verbal and non-verbal communication when it comes to formal communication. And if we define verbal communication, it's oral communication with words that you or others speak out loud. It's very clear. And we have a non-verbal communication. That means communicating without words. So communication without speaking. People gesture, smile, and engage in other behaviors that supplement or enhance spoken communication. And this non-verbal communication includes kinesthetic, proxemics, haptics, oculistics, and olfactics communication. And I can go through them. So first we have kinesthetic, means communication through body movement. So every cultures use, for example, postures, facial expression, hand gestures, and movement to communicate on a non-verbally method. For example, Asian cultures use, for example, bowing to show respect, and it's something it's something that have different meaning of body movement in other cultures, but it's the safest strategy to minimize them and their use, because it may have a different meaning in the other cultures. And then we have also proxemics that focuses on how people use space to communicate. So each culture has an appropriate distance for various level of communication. The violation of space may also have a comfortable or even offensive way on some cultures. So, for example, North American prefer 20 inches, while in Latin and Middle East cultures prefer less. And then we have also haptics, or the meaning is touching when we communicate through body or contact, and it's related to also proxemics that I mentioned. So the type of there are two type of touching here. We talk about no touching cultures that can be, for example, in Japan, US, England, and many other northern countries that are most close. They don't like to, they need a personal space.
Yeah.
And we have also moderate touching cultures that, like Australia, China, Ireland, and India. And we have also touching cultures like in Latin America, France, Italy, and Greece. And we have oculistic, that refers to communication through eyes contact. And For example, in USA and Canada, people are very comfortable and expect eyes contact to be maintained for a short moment during a conversation. But for example, in China and Japan, eyes contact is considered very rude and disrespectful. So it must be avoided in some cultures. And finally, we have olfactics. That means the use of smell as mean of non-verbal communication. So, for example, in US and UK, There are cultures that is uncomfortable with body odors, so they might find them offensive. And for example, Arab are much more accepting that, and they consider them as natural. And so in negotiating, we must be aware of this perspective and accept to adapt them to which culture we're talking about.
Wow. I I didn't know about this smell part of communication.
Yeah.
That it sounds like, if you're in a party, even if sometimes the smell is not good, you have to tolerate. If there are so many constraints, so many variables in communication, what happens to these the interpreters? Simultaneous interpretations, whether it's in a UN or in a EU Parliament, when what kind of impact all these elements have on them.
The role of interpreter is important, and is also provide a translation of foreign languages first of all, and require also greater linguistic um, skills than speaking a language or translating writing, for example, documents. um, the interpreter must also have technical knowledge and vocabulary to deal with technical details in common business transactions. And even if, for example, a negotiator understand both languages, the role of an interpreter is important because um, it's ensure the accuracy and the common understanding of an agreement. And the interpreters also help to remove the language barriers that can make a lot of mistakes and make communication between two parties more easier.
When you communicate with the non-natives, say for example, you're talking in French to somebody who's not a native but speaks French, what kind of techniques or what kind of what is that you should keep in mind when you communicate with the non-natives?
Yeah, first of all, and the most important thing I think is to make the communication easier.
Mhm.
Try to use most common words and meanings. Also try to follow the basic, for example, rules of grammar that you would use with a native person. Speak clearly and try to avoid difficult expressions, and especially also slang, because slang is based on age and also region. So for example, British English and US English is quite different when we talk about slang, so that must be avoided. And also try to summarize and try to repeat ourselves, so we use different words to make a non-native to understand what we want to talk about.
Have you seen that movie Lost in Translation?
No, I heard about it before. Yeah,
It's
but I
it's 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 a very funny, very interesting movie. You should watch it. It's based in Japan. So how this I think he's American businessman goes to Japan, and the kind of things that are depicted there are very hilarious. Coming back to the international negotiation, what kind of a strategy or steps, if you can think of, you would suggest?
international negotiation is more complex than domestic negotiation. So the differences in national cultures and politic economy system is very separate from the other partners. So therefore, international negotiation involves several steps. First, the preparation. So determine if the negotiation is possible, which means that knowing exactly what your company wants, and being aware of what we can compromise. For example, Latin American and Spanish people show their emotions through negotiating, but for example, Japanese and German tend to be more reserved.
Mhm.
And the second step is building the relationship. In this stage, then negotiator do not focus on business issue, but on social and interpersonal matters. So they develop opinions regarding the personalities of the negotiator, including whether if they can be trusted or not. Also exchanging, parties exchange task related information on their needs for the agreement, which pertains to the actual details of the proposed agreement. For example, typically both sides make a formal presentation of what they desire out of a relationship. So then both sides usually present their offer, which is their proposal of what they accept from that agreement. Then we have persuasions, where each side negotiate to attempt the other side to agree on its position of the negotiating process. And then we have making a concession that requires that each side relax some of its demand to meet the other party's need. So there are two sides of concession making differ among cultures. Sequential approach, where each side reciprocates concession made by the other. For example, it's something very common in North America. And then we have holistic approach, where each side makes very few, if any, concession until the end of the negotiating, and it's something very very common, for example, in Asia. And then we have the agreement, so the successful negotiating result to the final agreement, and the signed contract. The agreement must be considered with the chosen legal system. And last, we have post agreement. So, evaluating the success of completed negotiation that can be beneficial, because it allows the garnering of insight into the strength and weakness of the approach used during negotiating. And in some cultures, for example, post agreement may be avoided, for example, in US.
Based on how you explained, I'm thinking if you can actually pull the elements that make successful negotiation possible. What are those factors?
By applying everything I mentioned, I think that makes negotiations successful. But successful negotiator also prepares and understand these steps and adapt themselves to local host countries. A successful international negotiation are about understanding cultural differences, embracing languages barriers, and also managing different laws that require that the negotiation remain patient, also and tolerant negotiator, to not be not try to not judge, for example, the culture, be also flexible and creative. And finally, a personal skill that international negotiator needs to succeed is cultural intelligence, knowing how to adapt the challenges in a new cross-culture setting.
You represent a Norwegian delegation and go to France, right? Since you are very much familiar with both, what do you think? What will make you successful in France?
Yes. For example, in France, first step, talking French is
Okay.
something very important, because in France, we may meet some difficulties with the languages, because not everyone can talk, for example, English there. So talking French is something very good there, and also try to use indirect communication, because people there, they are not so direct when they talk. So, and also try to be open, because if you talk on a direct way, and also for example, take some space, then people will consider you as someone close, and maybe they get a bad impression of you.
Uh-huh.
So So people have to be there more open and show that they are adapted to that culture and understand the people there.
That's a very succinct presentation on the culture. And I think you have covered quite a lot. Thanks a lot. So, well, yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you very much, Fedwa. This is Fedwa Mokhtari joining us from Norway, and she was talking about intercultural negotiations, international or cross-cultural communication. And we hope that people would love as much as I heard. I loved listening to you, and we see another opportunity when we can tap in your expertise. Huh? So thank you very much, and take good care. We'll talk soon.